Hello, everybody. It's me, John McInnes, and also.
Hello, everybody. It's me, John Gallagher Platera, and also.
Hello, it's me, Charlie Gascoyne.
And this is the BLC banter bus, as we are now seriously calling it.
We're not seriously calling that.
That's what it's called.
Colloquially speaking, we are calling it the BLC banter bus, which I love the name, but on YouTube you will find it as BLC chats.
BLC chats, the more formal. So what is this? It's just like a chilled out discussion about people, how they do improv, how they get into it, what they like about it, what they hate about it, stuff like that. It's chilled out. I've got beer just to show that I'm chilled out. We've got a wonderful guest who just did a very fun show with us, Charlie. Charlie, how do you do improv?
Don't answer that, Charlie, if you don't want to.
As your lawyer is giving you advice right now. We usually kick off our questions with like how you got into improv. Like, what's your background?
Well, my background is mostly in theatre, so that's what I did my undergrad in, and that was sort of since I've been a little kid. Like, both my parents are in Amdram groups, so I've basically grown up doing theatre and stuff. But I ended up getting into improv just towards the end of my second year of my undergrad. My friend at the time, a little known friend of improv somewhere down the line, Joe Thompson, he saw me do some god-awful performance, which wasn't meant to be a comedy, but I hadn't received the memo, and so it was just farting around. And he was like, you should come and do improv with me, so you can leave theatre alone to the actors and come and ask around. And that was the University of Sheffield improv group, the Troupes. So that's where and I was with them for a couple of years before growing up and unfortunately not being a student anymore. Sad. Well, I am a student again now, but this is in the past.
Yes.
We'll just forget about that. We'll pretend I didn't do this in my adulthood. It's just a meteoric success from that point on. So yeah, that was pretty much it.
And you now host like one of the signature venues of improv in Sheffield, right, with Little Chicago.
Yeah. So that's like sort of our monthly show. So initially, Little Chicago was just like the show, and we sort of ran it. And now we've kind of expanded, so it's sort of, we run it like a production company, but Little Chicago Comedy Night is still like our main thing. And it's super fun, yeah. We would have been coming up to our 2-year anniversary in August, which is a shame, so obviously. But no, it's been great. We love running it, and we get to just meet loads of people from all over. And they come to Sheffield, which is great. We want people to come here and see our improv and do improv here. And just, the scene's got huge since I was first doing improv. So many different groups are coming out, and those groups are like interacting with groups outside of Sheffield. And now it does feel like Sheffield has a really strong improv scene. So we just love, like, people seem to want to come to Sheffield now, and we want them to come to Sheffield. So yeah, it's awesome.
Could you tell us a little bit about the improv scene in Sheffield? Like, what type of teams you guys have? Are there any schools there available for people?
Just remember, if you forget to name any, it's a direct insult to them.
Yes, so I'll start alphabetically. So, initially, certainly when I got into it, it was like the 2 university groups, and then there were like a couple of groups, and everyone kind of knew of each other, but there wasn't necessarily like a lot of working together. Like, we were aware of each other, but sort of since then, I would say, like, my experience in sort of the groups we know and we kind of work with, a lot of them did kind of spawn from the university group. So one of the big groups, like Strike Comedy, who me and Joe used to be members of, and they're also our house team at the night. Most of them have come through the university group, but there are quite a few like brand new groups. The guys at Foolish Bandits, they do a show called Cast vs Crew, and quite a few of those guys were like theatre people, but like new to improv. So it's dead cool that they're like balancing like the crew kind of like try and like sabotage the show for the cast, and it's a really smart new thing that wasn't really being done, and it's really cool that it's like happening in Sheffield. And then like on a non-comedy side, we have groups like Between Us, which is like a panda. They're showing their sex, lies, and improvisation. So it's not just comedy, guys. We're really versatile. And then sort of me and Joe run. So I guess like we run the regular sort of monthly improv night, and then the guys at the Sheffield Jam, they run a monthly jam. So I would say that's a big entry point as well, actually. So we mostly cater to either improvisers or people who want to come and see improv, but then the jam is like improvisers plus people getting into improv. So there have been people who've got into the jam who've then gone on to like do a course and things like that. The one thing I think that perhaps Sheffield maybe would benefit from or doesn't necessarily have is like necessarily a school, but there are like different opportunities to sort of get in and learn and meet people, and there are classes that come up, there are courses that come up, and if the person you're asking doesn't know, they probably know someone who does know, kind of thing. So it's become quite there's much more cohesion between all the different groups. Everyone seems to know everyone more, and they all work together, and yeah, it's really nice.
That sounds pretty good. Yeah, from like those first couple of years, it feels like it's grown and exploded in popularity, which is really great. That's awesome. That feels very similar to the way Bristol burst into the scene as well. That's really cool. The one thing I find, well, from someone based in Bristol, the one thing that I know about the improv scene from the north, or the first thing that comes to mind when I think of places like Sheffield and like Liverpool and Chester and Manchester, is that you guys are all connected in some way. Like you all know each other. Like people in Nottingham, you have a good relationship with them.
And how do you respond to Sheffield being classified as the north?
So I definitely consider Sheffield the north. Anyone who lives in Sheffield will tell you that it is the north. Okay. The only people who perhaps would refer to Sheffield as the south would be people maybe way up in the northeast, and even then, only because everything is a southerly direction from there anyway.
What's your opinion on the Midlands?
As a place, great. Sheffield is definitely not in the Midlands, but we love the Midlands. They have great improv scene, separate to Sheffield, because Sheffield is firmly in the north. But you are right, like they do. Everyone does seem to kind of know everyone, and even if it's just in like, you know, people from online that you've seen bits that improv, or you know of them, or you've heard of them, and it's kind of great because there's so many cities where even if you've not met someone, if you were to do a show there, you'd think, oh, maybe such and such is there, or oh, that group is in Manchester or whatever. So I think a lot of it is there's been a lot of networking opportunities. It's sort of more northerly, things like the British Improv Weekend that runs like twice a year. They're just great opportunities for like just people to get together and meet, and not only sort of work together, but like hang out together and just kind of become pals. And then it does feel really friendly. And I think sort of northern improv, perhaps if you're outside of it, maybe like because it's sort of how I feel perhaps about some of like the more southerly improv, for want of a better word. We do know some groups and like various groups, but because of like the placement of our show, when people apply for stuff, we have to point out like it's on a Wednesday night in Sheffield, and like for obvious reasons, like more of the groups that come to us like are closer sort of in distance to us. So there is perhaps that bit more like networking, but it does mean that we kind of sometimes we feel a bit distanced from like groups further away, and we wish we could like get involved in the scene in other places. But yeah, there definitely is that like northern feel, definitely.
Would you say that the government's HS2 train would enable this?
I've been pushing it for years because I would like to be 20 minutes earlier to my many engagements across the country. I know like there's been a lot of pushback, but the thing is if you want to open, you need to be there early. You want to get your drink, you want to get settled. I think it's worth building a trade. Flat out, houses be damned. I want to get there. I want to infiltrate. I want to take on the South. So yeah, I'm going to be in a position. And just thank you.
Well, you heard it here first, South.
Yeah.
Watch out. Watch out, Charlie's after you. What was the first improv show that you saw that made you think, I want to do this?
I think so certainly for like long form improv, so I'd seen little bits of like stuff like, everyone always says this, such a cliche, but like Whose Line Is It Anyway, like the gamey stuff. And that was my exclusive understanding of improv, kind of outside of sort of theatre-y improv, like devising and things like that. But I think the first time I ever saw like a long form show was we saw Ostentatious. And it like blew my mind. Like the idea of maintaining like a character and a narrative, and like taking nothing but like one word and then making it a whole story, a whole play, like an entire play, just totally blew my mind, because it was like, I've been seeing improv as like this cool fun thing that like it's impressive, but like you're doing it perhaps within the confines of like certain games, and there's certain rules to those games, and you play with or against them as like you see fit. But the idea that like you could improvise anything, an improvised blank, like an improvised play, and it was like, oh, I want to do that. Like I want to get on stage, like be absolutely terrified, but do like a whole narrative completely from scratch. Like the idea of doing that was, and I think that certainly from having done theatre for so many years, I was like, oh, imagine if I didn't have to learn any lines. Just a hat on and just dick around, and it was like that was so. Yeah, I remember that really stuck with me as just and the production quality, because it was just so. It was like this doesn't. It is improvised and it feels improvised, but only in the best possible way. Like there's, you can't see the cracks. Like it was just
What about your? Well, I mean, what was the first show you ever did then? Like, did you go straight into like short form, or did you narrative, or long form?
Yeah, it would have been short forms. It would have probably been like a shrimps show. And the university shows were always great for that, because there were always, all the other members of the society would be there. So that was already like a guaranteed load of supportive people. But also, like, as a student, it was great because you could get all your student friends to come, and all your other student mates were bringing, and they all wanted to buy drinks and cheer, and it was great. And like, 9 times out of 10, they were just a great audience. So I think, I think my first show was it was a topper pub, like most of them are, a really good pub. And I was so nervous that I couldn't stop laughing all the way through, which is still a problem I have now. I just have to learn to just deal with it. If I find it funny, it's like I'm just gonna have to laugh. But I was just so I was so worried that I was gonna say the wrong thing that I thought, well, better to just laugh all the way through it in the face of the person who's speaking. So I don't think it was a rip roaring success, but because it was a student like environment, everything you did, everyone was like, "Way!" It's like participation trophy, which was so lovely. And it was, I think that I can imagine that if your first show went terribly, you may never do improv again. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but for me, I don't like to do things that I might not be good at.
Yeah.
Very early on.
I think that's common.
So I think, like, had I not felt like I had a really good time, or that there was something to be gained from it, I probably would have like never gone on stage again. I did stand up for a bit, only until like the first time I had a bad gig, and I was like, I have no interest in doing this ever again. Like, we draw a line, but we don't speak like that. So
can't ever brag about your improv shows. Never had a bad one.
Hang on a minute. That's not to say I've never had a bad improv show. The great thing about improv is you can always blame your scene partner, so that's fine.
That's great. Using that logic, I too have never done a bad show.
Yeah. I did other people's bad shows. That's fine. So yeah, it was. I got hooked. I think just on the supportiveness of the people you were on stage with, other people off. I think it was definitely that. Everyone wanted it to go well, so why would you not want it to go well? And it was just a nice feeling.
I think a normal transaction for somebody who wants to get into improv performing is you find that you have a sense of community when you first start doing it. You enjoy the people that you're around, especially in like a university environment. And then there comes, I think, this is definitely true for me. This might be true for you guys as well. But there definitely comes a transactional time where you start to realize that what you've done previously is like, it's that community field of improv, and then you sort of surpass and you go towards a level where you're like, I know how to like try and consistently make people laugh. I get it now.
Yeah, you have to go from like forming for your friends to like not your friends.
Yeah,
It's kind of a hard transition.
Well, when did you find that, Charlie? When did you get to that transition from performing to an audience?
I think for me, and this is going to sound awful, but like it was when I realised I could kind of break the rules a bit and get away with it, like, because I think there was a time when like I remember learning improv, so it was a lot of me like keeping the rules, as it were, like in my head and thinking, don't say no, don't ask a question. And then I thought, oh, I don't say that to myself anymore. I've probably got a bit good at it. That's okay. But then I think it was probably like almost coming full circle when I thought, if I pull a gun out on stage or say no or ask a question or break the fourth wall or whatever it is that I'm not meant to do, and it doesn't feel like a great big disaster, I was kind of like, that freedom now where I feel like I'm stepping on stage perhaps without running 101 things in my head beforehand. But it did happen very, very gradually because I mostly was in other people's troupes for just a really long time. So my entire feeling of improv was just someone was going to tell me where we were performing, we were going to get the suggestion, and then I was just going to play and have fun with the people that I liked hanging out with and I was like working on stage with. So there was that feeling of like, I know that they're fun and good to be around and we seem to do good shows together and that's great. And I think it was perhaps maybe even moving into doing like my own stuff, but like perhaps like when I moved into doing the twoprov stuff and things like that, where or when I'd started teaching stuff, when I'd almost slightly stepped outside of just I am just part of a troupe role and thought, well, I just feel like I can kind of bend improv a bit more to suit me, like rather than me just trying to like jump onto it and hang on for dear life and hope I don't make a massive mistake. I felt a bit more confident that I could be like, yeah, I'm gonna do some improv now. That's something I can. That's fine. I'll have a go at that. Like, so yeah, I think that's sort of. I wouldn't say I noticed it happening immediately. It was definitely like a gradual thing. It's just suddenly like, oh, I've been doing this for 5 years. That's crazy. But like, but yeah, definitely that sort of shift. Wasn't fun.
What would you say, like, in terms of like, not necessarily like hard rules, but like things people have taught you in workshops? What's something that like you think is really important, but like not a lot of people like pay a lot of attention to? And what's something that like you've been taught that like a lot of people think is great, but you're like, doesn't really work for me?
I love this question because I go on about this a lot. So can I answer the second bit first?
No.
So something that it is taught a lot, and it's not just taught in improv, but it's taught a lot in performance in general, is eye contact. And it is really harped on about that it's like this big thing of like, it's how you connect with your scene partner, it's this, it's that. And I kind of have to call light on it, because while it is our way of connecting with your scene partner, it's not the way. Like, those of us that like maybe aren't neurotypical, I don't do eye contact. I don't do eye contact with anyone. But the idea that like there should almost be this expectation of like you staring into someone's eyes, it's like my for me personally, it's like it's a write-off, and I think it works. I think it works if you can do it.
Yeah.
I think it's wrong to teach, especially at like any level, but especially like at like entry level, that that's how you know the emotion, you know what they're saying. It's like there's a million and one other ways that we convey like emotion and character, and you know, not to mention like often if someone walks on and does an action, or they walk on and do a voice, or they walk on and do a character, that's not all just happening in the two globes in the middle of their head. Like that's happening in so much more that they do. And I mean, and so I think I cringe a little bit when I hear people say like eye contact, and what you actually mean is like, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like sort of stagecraft, if anything, like how you position yourself, that you're aware of your scene partner and you're listening and you're like looking at them and taking it on board. Staring into someone's eyes is not actually the same thing as that. So I get on my soapbox about eye contact a bit. But to answer the first part of the question, to come back to it, it's probably not something that people don't necessarily think is important, but I think it's something that people think they do and then don't, is listening. Like, it's like the whole listen, react, listen to your scene partner thing. And I think it's brought up a lot in the same way that yes and is kind of like brought up a lot, but then people don't always either know what it means to do that or actually do it. Like the listening to what someone has said. And I think it's such a stickler for me because it's like, I can, if this is a two-person scene, then it has to be a two-person scene. If all I'm going to do is wait for the pause when that person stops speaking, and then I might as well just do a one-prov, like, it's ridiculous. But I think it's that active listening as well. Like, it's not just, yes, they seem to have agreed with my general point, and I'll keep hammering point A. Like, I do this workshop where we look at like communication skills, and it's basically a study of communication that we then just apply for improv. And one of the exercises I make people do is where they're still taking conversational turns, but they're only sticking to their own topic. And it's quite hard to do, but you find yourself like drifting away from that person, like physically, and you're just whatever thing you started talking about, you are staying on that subject. And I think a lot of people do it without realizing. They've established the scene, the person has responded, but all they've heard is that they have responded. They're not like taking the gifts out of what's been said. They're not actively responding as though it's a real conversation between real people. They're thinking about the next laugh, they're thinking about the next thing. And obviously, like, no conversation you have in an improv scene is completely naturalistic. That would be boring as hell. Like, it would just be, you know, people talking about the weather or whatever, or coronavirus is like the case of nowadays. But the idea of listening skills should genuinely be that you are listening and hearing and taking an approach and then responding. So I think it's, not to be underestimated of like the importance of actually like active listening in improv.
It's kind of funny. I think it would be interesting to figure out like how many real conversations do people have, who's listening. Like, I don't know how many people actually listen in a conversation, especially like just in a pub chat or whatever. Like, a lot of people are just like, I'm waiting for my slot to say this thing. I've said it, I'm out.
Yeah.
And they're not like, they don't care what's happening.
No. You get it, like, it's like stereotypical conversations between like the classic kind of like hairdresser and person getting a haircut, and they're just asking questions at you, and they respond to whatever you say with like another question.
Yeah.
And it's because of that, like, I don't know, like the social convention. You don't really know this person, but you're in the same personal space because like cutting your hair, and so they don't want silence. Or taxi drivers is another one. Like, nobody wants that silence, but also like we're not also that invested in having the conversation. So yeah, it's exactly it. Like, someone speaks and then someone responds, but all you're really doing is just you're hearing all the right bits and then just saying your next bit. And I think in improv, like, it's not that it necessarily tanks the scene, but it doesn't make it as good as it could be. Like, so much of the game can come from if someone says something that's particularly good and you've just sort of missed it. It's like such a missed opportunity, and like the way that you can sort of bounce off each other and like build it together, whereas otherwise you just run the risk of like one person just kind of like dragging one along with them. This is the story, this is where we're going. It's a tricky one to get right because it's like you say, in life we probably don't listen to the show, but yeah, definitely.
I think in terms of things that the audience will notice, maybe it's the number one thing, because I know that particularly a lot of theatre people, I don't know if that's true of you, but a lot of people with theatre backgrounds are very concerned about like walking through objects. I think it is important, but I don't think the audience notices as much as a lot of people actually think they notice. But if two people are not like actually listening to each other, it's very obvious very quickly. Because when you're writing a script, those two characters can't hear each other because literally one person is writing it down. But like when it's two people, they actually have to be like, I have to respond to that as if we're both on the same script.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point about like a scripted conversation. You're writing both sides of a conversation, and I think I love the point you make about like object work, because object work's one of those things where if you get it right, the audience might be impressed, but if you get it wrong, they might not care. Like, you walking through a kitchen side that you've established, no one is going to go, well, I'm completely out of the story. Like, I possibly believe. But if you've set up a door that you then remember to storm out of, they might go, oh, that's a bit good. But for them, it's not actual scenery. You're not actually going to fall over. It's not, the audience haven't like conjured up that exact thing in like their mind palace that they've now like pinned in there, and it's like, I can't believe, this is the worst show I've ever seen who walks through doors.
I'm not sure they even could. Like, you would have to be like, nice store. It's white. It's got like those 4 panels. Like, whatever they're thinking is probably not what you're thinking. So
the story must be garbage if that's what they're doing. Like, lost them so early on because all they're doing is like, I wonder if there are grapes in this fruit shop. Like, oh, there are, and you stood on them. Oh, I'm so mad, so vexed. But I think you do spot it straight away when it's like, certainly as well if like, say person B has said something that's clearly like got a laugh, but person A then hasn't really carried it on, and I think it's jarring. Like, I think
it's a big thing in jams, like, because it'll come up in jams a lot, and you can notice who's like good because they're working with it. But when it's 2 people who are not listening, I'm more looking at the back line, being like, let's get somebody in here to help out.
Yeah, let's meld these 2 worlds.
Yeah. Let's have somebody come in and be like, these people are both crazy.
I think with that's interesting that you guys are saying about that. I think I kind of slightly disagree with it. I don't think the audience is care. I don't think the audience is like picking up on those kind of things. But it definitely, if someone goes through like a table or something, it's not like the audience are like, oh, I'm going to get so mad about it. But they lose the reality of the scene. I think they lose they lose trust in it. So like they won't care, they won't like get super mad at it, but the moment someone walks through or even says something that isn't true of what was said before, I think you lose faith in it. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's like when I'm watching something, you lose faith in it, and it's not that you get angry at it. You just start to like lose focus on what it is that's been happening.
I think it's important. If it's something that's important to the scene and people notice it, if it's important to the scene, people will notice it. Like, so if the scene is about like this table that you've inherited or something, they will notice if you walk through it. But if it's a scene that I'm doing, and all my object work in the scene is opening a 2-sided fridge and getting a can of beer or Pepsi out and putting it on this table, if I forget anything there, I don't think they care too much. They really like when I remember it, but I just in comparison to listening in particular, listening they immediately notice.
Yeah, I think it's less for me. I mean, this would be, and obviously, like as improvisers, when we watch other improv shows, we are seeing things and noticing things that perhaps like it's the same with theatre. Like you can tell sometimes maybe when someone's forgot a line, even if they covered it up really well and all that kind of stuff. Like, oh, that was probably a mistake, but like it was covered well. But I think a lot of it is more, it's not necessarily a mistake, but it was perhaps a missed opportunity. So it's not that it was bad necessarily that you walked through the table, but you remembering to step round the table is like that little added bonus. It's almost like there's like a meter of, and I think a lot of it is improv is impressive, and it's impressive already. Like by nature, the idea of we're just going to get up and make this whole thing up from our heads is impressive. But those little extra bits are great, and I think there are some things that are unforgivable. If you deny where you've been, if you've took a can out of the fridge, but then 5 minutes later someone's suggesting that you're not in the kitchen, those things are jarring, and it's like you say, like, they're not necessarily furious about it, but you're losing them. They're less invested. They're less, you've only got. I mean, most improv groups don't have sets necessarily. They don't have costume or whatever. So everything that you're saying is true. The audience have to just take your word for it. So the more that you, I guess, can commit to that, the better it is. So I think, I can see it wouldn't annoy me, but I'm always impressed when someone does it. Like when someone remembers vaguely where they put their drink down, or they step around something like a body's been established on the floor and they step over it. I'm always like, I saw you remember where that was. That's good, a little tick in my head. Like, I think, and I think audiences definitely do react to that sort of thing.
I don't hate when somebody tries to change their object work mid doing it, because they've remembered something, like, even if it's like they're going to do like bad phone, and then they're like, no, it's like a real phone. I hate when they change it. If they just did like this, I wouldn't like it, but whatever. They've consistently made the choice. Or like they go to put like something down, and then they're like, "Oh no, it's a table."
Yeah, I think it's like when they call big attention to it as well. And it's like even if the mistake has been noticed, your biggest mistake is like drawing. It's like someone's holding a cat and then they realise they've stopped doing it, so they suddenly like interrupt the scene to be like, "Oh, forgot I had a drink," and you go, "Yeah, well, 50% of people saw you do it and got over it. 50% of people hadn't noticed. 100% of people now are like, why did you?" If you had an actual prop that you just dropped, fair enough, but like it is invisible and imaginary. I think sometimes as well, when certainly like early on, you get really hung up on object work, and it can almost be, if it starts being restrictive and you start thinking, oh no, I've given myself all these props, then don't if you've gone to get your phone out of your pocket and then apparently it's still in your hand, then you go and get out your pocket again. It's like, it is okay, like it's a forgivable thing, but I think it's much more unforgivable to be like, oh, didn't you remember I had it in my hand, but then I didn't, and then I got it. Oh, this is funny, and everyone needs to hear this inner monologue of mine. All about my invisible phone. That's great. That's great comedy that everyone's gonna get in on.
I guess the dialogue for me is more important than the object work. I think if the dialogue is good, you can forgive a couple of object work stuff, because if it's truthful and you sort of understand what's going on, that's the stuff that you're going to be interested in. When the object
I guess it kind of for me depends on the scene. You know, there's maybe some scenes where, I don't know, maybe the object work is kind of like what the scene's about, but you're right. To me, it's more like what the idea of the scene is.
Yeah. Charlie, you've transitioned from a performer to a teacher, seeing as you've been doing that. Is this the first time you've heard of this?
I absolutely love pointing out that I'm not an improv teacher, whilst I keep continuing to teach improv.
Well, too bad, because John has the degree to give you here today.
Yep. What do you class yourself then as? If you're not an improv teacher, what are you?
I suppose it's one of those things where like if someone asked me what improv I did, I would immediately just talk about the performance stuff that I do, and then if someone was like, and the teaching, I go, oh yeah, like and it's not that I don't or won't. A lot of what I tend to do with improv though is, because I don't consider myself an expert in improv at all. I don't think anyone should, perhaps, but like I certainly don't consider myself super knowledgeable about improv, other than like I can tell you about my own experiences, my own opinions, and that kind of thing, which I guess in a way like some teachers will do. But what I do is perhaps like most of the workshops I ever teach, like all the workshops I teach, tend to be based on other things that I apply to improv. So I'll do like a theory thing that I'm then like, and this would be good for improv, or I'll do a speech therapy thing where I'm like, we're going to look at this and apply it to improv. So I kind of cheat. What I'm saying is I'm a fraud. I'm a fraud. Because I wouldn't say that I wasn't capable of teaching an improv workshop, but I wouldn't necessarily push myself forward and be like, me guys, it's me. Come and learn improv from me. I don't know. I think it's probably because I do break too many rules. And I forget too many things, and I would just be parroting lots of great lessons that other people told me, in which case I would just say, go to their workshops. But yeah, I will teach, and if you want to give me money to teach your guys a class, then I'm world class and very expensive. If you ask me honestly, like I consider, like, it's like this much of my improv, like it's a tiny smidge.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think first thing that comes to mind is like I think anybody, you know, you could, depending on your experience and what you've done and what you've seen, that's how you are as a teacher, you know. I don't think, yeah, I agree with you. No one's like qualified at all. No one's qualified. It's just your experiences on stage.
It's interesting to hear your analysis of like rules. So like, is there anything that you think is like an important rule? So I generally basically say rules are just like ways to like make scenes better probabilistically. Like it won't work for every scene, and in fact it should be disregarded based on some scenes. The only rule at all is that, like, if it works, then do it. Like, if something works, then you should keep doing that in some way or form, or in some abstract sense. So, are rules some stuff that, like, just put you in your heads, or is there anything you would be like, this is useful to me?
I think so. If you're asking me as, like, say teaching, say, beginners or something, I would say that there has to be some vague rules or some sort of preliminary rules. I think things like yes and avoiding questions, purely like for that kind of just getting into the swing of, and just so you don't spend all those early scenes just realizing you're saying no to someone, or you're putting all the onus on someone else by asking questions. But for me, that I do think there does come a point where the idea of rules becomes restrictive. There are certain rules that I think should be applied to all performance that are less about improv. So respecting your scene partner, endowing your scene partner, that kind of working together, respecting boundaries, and like respecting like the audience's boundaries in terms of what I mean, there's different shows that have different limits on that, but like understanding that what you do has an effect on the audience and on the people around you. General stagecraft rules, like try and make sure the audience can hear you, like bare minimum. You don't need to shout, but try and make sure they can see you, that kind of thing. But again, like, no two improv scenes are the same, as it were. So like, I do think that sometimes people get so caught up in the rules that it's almost like they get used as a way of like criticizing a scene. Oh, that was good, but he did ask a question. You think, well, it was good and he asked a question. Like, it doesn't. Someone saying no in an improv scene does not automatically make a terrible improv scene. If the rules are just a rod for us all to just hit ourselves with and be like, oh, we're not worthy, like. And it's one of the big things I have about teaching is like, I love learning improv from other people, but I think it's very dangerous to assume that there are teachers and there are students and that's it. Like, there are the people that know improv so well that they can tell you how to do it, and then there are the people that aren't good enough yet and have to learn. Like, most of the best workshops I've been to are just people saying, here's a cool way that I do this, or have you tried this thing, or here's a, and it's you going, oh wow, there's so many different ways to do improv. But I think if the teaching is just, here's the rules, here's how you do it, outside of something like a Harold or something that has a particular structure, or even like an Armando that has a particular structure, the idea that if you don't tick all these boxes, you've done a less good improv scene is always a bit like, it's always not sat quite right with me. I've always thought that is restrictive, but
Yeah, that sounds insane. Well, I mean, like, teaching that way to, like, checkbox, I mean, people do it, but, like, it doesn't seem like, I don't understand it. But I guess my question is more specifically, like, if you're in a scene, and let's say you've just made the choice that this isn't going well, you can feel it from the audience, or you can just feel it on the stage. What do you do in your brain? What's happening? Can you, like, do you have any, like, general thing where, like, right, this isn't working? Obviously, like, I say obviously, I don't think anybody has, like, okay, here's my checklist to go to, but, like, if like, you could just feel it's not working, what do you think you would do?
So, I think my knee-jerk reaction is, I'm a bit of an establisher. One of, like, sort of my kind of knee-jerk things is I suddenly start saying what's happening and like, oh, this is what's... So I think sort of in that initial kind of, oh shit, this has gone wrong, I'm likely to sort of say, oh, but this is happening, or to suddenly kind of, and I think my biggest panic as well is almost taking that onus onto myself, because if I'm stood saying nothing, or I think it's gone wrong, it's probably my fault, so I'm going to keep going. And perhaps, if anything, that is almost can be a bit steamrollery, like suddenly I'm like, shit, we need to crank this up a gear, let's move it. But I guess
I certainly did it in the first scene that we did, and then that run where I was like, hey, I'm 35 all the time.
That's exactly the kind of thing, because I worry that when an audience doesn't seem to be reacting, it's because the scene has got stale, or because we haven't necessarily found a game or we haven't hooked onto something. So while I would never be like, fuck it, the scene is dead, I'd be like, this scene needs restart, it needs another level. So this transactional scene or something that we've set up is a bit dry, it's a bit shit. Fuck it, a dinosaur comes in, that's fine, that's happening now. Like, and if that's like, it might not always be the best answer, but I would always rather kind of just like slam on the gas and just be like, we're going for it, we're going big. Because I think the audience will remember if they were laughing by the end, but they will definitely remember negatively if the scene just dwindled and someone had to sadly walk across the front. So, yeah.
I think it's like your opinion on rules, because I've seen a lot of people doing scenes where they are just like acting particular rule marks, and it's not funny. But they are doing what they have been told to do.
They're doing by the book improv, and I think, and again, I think that's what I sort of meant earlier when it was like, when I realised I could break the rules and not have done it wrong. It's like you didn't realise someone had took the stabilizers off you, and it's like, oh, I'm riding on my own. Like suddenly you're like, it's not that there's anything wrong with the rules, and it's not that you should try. And I think a lot of it as well depends on, a lot of the rules aren't necessarily even for your benefit, they're for the benefit of someone else. Like not saying no and avoiding asking questions isn't about you. It's dead easy to ask questions. Why would you not? Who doesn't love asking questions? But to be asked questions is a nightmare. To be told no is a nightmare. So I guess my excuse for sort of breaking the rules, as it were, or just kind of being very abstract and not always playing to the top of my intelligence, whatever it is, and being a bit like wild, is when it comes to working with Joe, I know that there aren't any limits in terms of how ridiculous and how stupid and how fourth wally, like, and I think he feels the same. So I don't necessarily worry about if I was to say no, or I was to suddenly get out a gun and be on drugs and ask him who, what, where. Like, I worry less about how he would deal with that. So I think I can definitely see the benefit of rules, for want of a better way of putting it, or stabilizers, as I've now referred to them as, for the benefit of like working together. Like, don't screw your scene partner over because you can't be bothered to think about what you're gonna say.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like you don't have to obey by the rules, but if you could spend 1 nanosecond thinking about whether just saying no and going and then storming off is actually the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
But that would.
It's a cowardly kind of thing to be like, so where are we? Rather than making a choice yourself. It's not because it's a rule, it's like, you're not doing your side of the work.
Like, and I think, and if you were going to storm on as their, like, coach afterwards and be like, you totally ruined that, why did you, like, that's a terrible approach to teaching, but you're, as a performer, especially like an experienced performer, you've been around long enough to know like what's a good way to open a scene. The way that, you know, if your team tends to often take a physical start to a scene, or comes on with a, you know, if you know that when you're the first person in a scene that it's your responsibility to kind of start something, and it's like, yeah, you don't beat yourself, but we've all come on scenes and gone, what's this? And you've gone, why the hell would you say that? That's the most unhelpful thing you could possibly say. But you know, to then say that that's never appropriate is like, well, it's a bit of a hard and fast, you know, rule to kind of take it with. It's like, yeah, I think you are ultimately responsible for how the scene goes, and if you can perhaps pinpoint loads of mistakes to loads of really obvious rule breaks, then, you know, maybe you could revisit Improv 101. But yeah, I think that's it.
That's a good point, actually. The Improv 101 thing, because I think there are rules for every single stage of your process. So I'd say yeah, I think rules are needed for Improv 101. There needs to be rules. I think you always have rules. You're always going to have rules. It's just the further up you go and the more experience you have and the more times you do shows, the rules just become a bit more lenient. They just become
those are very helpful as a teaching thing. Like if you want to teach math to somebody, you just be like, here's the fundamental theorem of algebra, go. Like, and that is not helpful to learning like how to like calculate stuff. So like you're saying, like, yeah, 101, just like put my questions. At some point you should probably start asking questions. But yeah, 101, yes and everything, and go back.
Because you're kind of sharing someone, like if they've never done it before, they've never done improv before, they've never stood on a stage with another person and invented from scratch, don't, eventually they'll be able to light fires by clicking their fingers, but for now they're going to need some kindling and maybe a lighter. And I think that's important to kind of recognise that in those very early stages, the rules allow people to think. They're not limiting because there's nothing to limit at that stage. Their own creativity and their own reason for being an improv needs something to hang on to. They only become restrictive when you're only using them as, to sort of beat people over the head with. So yeah, I'm not anti-rules, but I reserve the right to see each improv scene as a completely individual thing, and that there can't possibly be any blanket rule that can ever apply to anything other than really obvious things like don't be an arse, don't be horrible to anyone that's in the scene or the audience. That's about the only rule I think is consistent, is don't do anything that is immoral or dangerous. that's my one rule. It's good to know I have a limit. No weapons, real weapons. Try not to get anybody hurt. No fires. That's my main rule. Other than that, everything.
A really funny anecdote that I heard and really resonated with me starting improv was there's a good improviser who was talking about that starting out, and a teacher in the class was like, why did you do this kind of scene? And he was like, what do you mean? I'm not actively choosing to do anything in the scene. I'm just doing anything that I can think of. I have no choices in the scene. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just saying literally. It's so hard to just say everything. You're acting like I had a choice in what my choice was. And I think that's true for one-on-one people. That's how I felt. I was I don't know. I'm just trying to not stand there not talking, which is what I want to do.
Yeah, I think that is so. It's sort of the old thing about method acting is it's not there's anything wrong with method acting, but some people just act. It's oh, why did you choose to do that? And they're like, I don't remember choosing. I thought the character sounded like this. I thought at this point I should raise my voice. And I think sometimes I'm a bit like that with improv is I'll justify later. I can't justify now. I probably had a process, but it happened at the speed of light, and I went with what I thought was. And I think it has to be a bit like that. There's no way that you could suggest that everyone, what are you thinking about just before you open your mouth? Because if people then just get in their head and in actual fact, you're acting automatically because you're experienced, because you've rehearsed for a long time. You're doing things based on the fact that you've done similar things before, and they're just kind of ingrained in you. So I think, yeah, the idea that choices is such an interesting thing in improv. You might have opportunity, if you're on the back line, you might make a choice to come into a scene, and that's quite a conscious thing. But there are so many moments in scenes where you have completely acted spontaneously, and you didn't know that was going to happen until you had done it and it's gone. Which of course is the big danger, I guess, when it comes away from you. But yeah, absolutely. I think you can get so bogged down in what theory you were implementing there when you did that thing, as opposed to I thought that would be funny, or I thought that would be a good idea, so I just did it.
That moves on to a question that McInnes always asks on the show, but I just thought of it as well, which, if I'm just going to say it, I'm sorry McInnes, but what has been something, Charlie, that you have disliked that somebody else in an improv scene has done?
Not just something, not one-off thing. Something, not what's a behaviour that happens in a scene that to your bones makes you think, I hate it. Even though you should be in basic anything. They do it, they do this move and you're like, ah!
This is why McInnes should have asked the question, not me.
It's a good question. Oh, if I could, I'm trying to put myself now in an improv scene where someone's doing something I don't like.
Well, we don't get ours as examples, because we already go on our I hate when people are stupid in the scenes. I hate it. When they don't know stuff.
I think to me, it's a big one. The first thing that came to my head was things like steamrollering, or just general dominance, like you are just dominating the scene. You think because you're saying the most words, you are smashing it, and you're talking over me and you're talking over everyone else, and maybe even the audience is laughing, but like we're not laughing, and you being, you know, and it's like, I think that gets to me a bit. But probably more specifically is like, it's like you just said about like when people play stupid, like I'm almost the other way. I think it's when someone craves the authority. So they're always high status, but like they're high status even in a situation where it wasn't called for. And I maybe this is like, perhaps as a female improviser, I've come on like the wrong end of this a lot, where my position is automatically demoted by someone else's like character move. And when it happens like so consistently, like I've just come on and I've got, I don't know, I've developed the formula, and immediately someone comes on and they go, thank you, assistant. And you go, whoa, what? On top of the world. The next minute I'm somebody's assistant, or the classic, like, I'm just the wife. Like, I've been, whoever I've called off to on stage, suddenly I'm their wife, which I think is a bit, and it's not a terrible, like, playing a high status character is not a terrible, like, game move or like a character move. But I think it's when you notice that someone is wrestling with like the inability to ever be vulnerable and like be a low status character, especially if you know you've come on as a very strong character. You've marched on hands behind your back and you've took high status, they've gone and gone, we'll see about that, and been taller and more high status. And I find that, like, I think it says more about a performer where it's that kind of like reluctance to sort of be told what to do or give up any, because I think as well, like, as a higher status character you can almost control the narrative a bit more, because you as a character have more control over them, therefore you can. And I think it worries me perhaps if someone feels unable to perhaps be led by other people's actions, not to mention that it is very restrictive as performer for someone to come on and go, you're the assistant now, you're the wife now, you're the lackey, I own you, that's great, so when I say jump you say how high. So I'd have to say that's probably my biggest pet peeve, outside of really obvious things, like just someone being like, the louder I am, the funnier I am. I'll just loud my way through this whole scene, and that's gonna be excellent. So yeah, I'd have to say, high statusing West wasn't required is my big pet peeve.
Well, what's the opposite then? What's like the best thing that possibly someone can do? Well, yeah, the opposite of that question, basically.
Yeah. I guess, like, on a similar thing, but like flipped, when someone completely accepts, someone gets so on your level, and you're like, oh, like, you've come on and you've either suggested something that's a bit out there, or you've come on with like really high energy, and they just like match that. They're just like, I'm here for the ride. Like, they've not undermined it, they've not played it down, they've not decided that they're the yin to your yang. They've gone, really? Oh, and they've just, and you already can just tell that like this is going to be like a wild ride. And I think I love that. Like, I think I tend to play very high energy characters, and I also tend to play quite abstract themes and just weird things. So being able to come on stage and be like, here's something bizarre as a concept, and they're like, I'm here for it. I'm going to match your voice. I'm going to match your energy. I'm completely sold on your dream. I'm super here for it. Yeah, that's my absolute favourite thing. When the stars align and you're both super on the same level.
You were saying before that, well, you've been in different shows before, but you're now primarily doing the Long Boy and the Noise with Joe Thompson, who's lovely, who's wonderful. What's it like being what's it like doing that twoprov, doing that transaction from like short form games with a group to now having this pretty fun show with just one other person?
I think ultimately it's very freeing. Like, we never have to worry about that we've set something up that other people are going to have to deal with. Like, if we've gone very abstract or we've kind of built something that's a bit, we never have to think, oh god, there's going to be a backline of 4 people burning like fiery holes in the back of our heads. Like, why have you set up this castle on a cloud? Like, who would do this? This is horrible. I think initially it was scary though, knowing that it was only you two. and no one's going to come and sweep, no one's going to come and save you. There's like, it's your job to get yourself in and out of any mess. So it took me a while to get used to that idea of like, any and all the characters are just between the two of you. If you want to multi-role, which we love doing, and that took a while to get used to, but now I love it. Like, it's a really fun game. But there's no, if you're talking about a character who exists off stage, no one is going to be clever enough to come on and do that. Like, if it's going to happen, it's going to be one of the two of you is doing that, and that's like, you're going to have to remember that you're playing all these 8 different characters. So the actual kind of logistics of doing a show are much different. You have to sweep, you have to edit. But it was fun because we can be a bit creative. We tend to do a lot of like stepping out of the scene and saying we go back to X, Y, and Z, or flashbacks and things like that. And just, I guess, ultimately, like, all the characters that I would never dream of subjecting, like, 5 really nice, lovely people to in a troupe. With Joe, I'm just like, haha, you've opened Pandora's box, and now it's all coming out. And any kind of sort of terrible decision I make, he's just like, yeah, super on that. And it's great. We're very similar performers. Like, we have a very similar style. We tend to be quite in sync, so it's kind of nice in a way that you only have the two of you to be responsible for. You're not running the risk of perhaps like the game not being picked up and maybe not everyone knowing, or you potentially pushing someone out. Like, we tend to just get to Crazy Town very soon, and we're both like, we're at home. This is great. This Crazy Town is exactly where we were aiming for. That's fantastic. So yeah, it was weird at first, but now it's just, yeah, it's really freeing, I think.
Is there an improv format that you would love to do that you haven't done before?
And to addendum to that, could you give us a little bit, because I haven't seen it, a little bit of your newest format, Not By the Book? Like, talk a little bit about like what that is.
So, to answer the second bit first again, so we are just due to various reasons, like we're not going to be doing not by the book going forward, but it never, I mean, partly thanks to COVID and partly thanks to a lot of other things, it never quite got off the ground. But initially the idea was that it was like this love letter to all the crime shows that we love watching, and it was an opportunity. We wanted to do a full-length narrative that we'd not really done before. We'd mostly done sort of Armando-esque type things. We'd not really done a themed thing, and we were like, we want to make stories, but we neither of us wanted to get tied down with like plot points that we were going to have to like tie up at the end, and like we didn't necessarily want to have beats where we'd have to try and hit, like, we're a big fan of like improvised murder mysteries, but we know that that's not our strengths. Remembering who said what and then tying it all together in a really clever, it was just not. Whereas with what we thought we could do with like a big crime drama is just characters, like, raise the stakes constantly. It doesn't matter if the plot has gone like really overblown. When in doubt, the criminal will just jump off a building at the end, or the bridge will blow up, or we'll catch him and it'll all be fine and we'll justify it as we go. And for the most part, like, it was fun. Like, it was fun for that. But like any kind of long form narrative, like, regardless of how much you've just built up the characters and stuff, you do need to remember what you've said. You do need to remember what you've set up. The story still has to feel like each scene should follow the previous one, and our knee-jerk reaction often just fell into just trying to be funny. Like, we'd sort of stick to characters and try and hit certain kind of tropes, but ultimately I think, like, when in doubt, it was like, let's just be silly. Like, so perhaps like we weren't as suited to that particular style as we thought. But sort of like, to answer the first part of the question, we do want to do more like themed stuff, because like being a twoprov, like, we know that we're comfortable doing scenes or whatever, that's fine, but there's a few ideas we've been floating. One of the ones we'd really like to look at doing is the idea of like a show reel. So sort of like someone's like audition tape, or like a kind of a clips of like an actor. Like, actors have these sort of show reels where they're flexing their actor's credentials and like their abilities. And because both of us have come from a theatre background, we find that kind of like hilarious, like in a great way, like nothing sort of against it, but. And especially because improv is like constantly caught in this, we want to be taken seriously by theatre, but then you have people that say, no, improv isn't theatre, and some theatre people don't take it seriously, but then other theatre people try and pretend that they're not doing improv so they can sneak in with the cool kids and stuff. And we find that very funny because we think it doesn't really matter whether it is or it isn't. So the idea of perhaps me and Joe as like theatre people coming in and flexing our theatre credentials through improv and kind of merging the two things. But the other ideas that we've had are things like the idea of like just conversation, like the idea of like, we really love certain like sitcoms, like things like Dinner Ladies, where sort of it's people who all work together or they see each other regularly and they've known each other a long time, and the kind of the conversations they have are like based on their experiences of being with each other, and it's like in jokes, and it's those little, you know, it's not what you're saying, it's the way that you say it and all the context and the subcon, like, and it's, we're sort of floating around some ideas of like shows we want to do based on like our interests. I think that's perhaps what we're trying to lean towards, rather than being like, what would be a really funny thing that we could do? What would, like, what's our interest? What do we find funny? Like, what theatre is something we both know? Why not use that in our improv kind of thing? So I think we're looking to try and find a new long form, like a full length show with an interval and an introduction, maybe even applause at the end. That would be great. That we could like sort of, you know, that we could market as a full show. Like, this is, you know, this is more than just us trying to tag on the end of 15-20 minutes of someone else's show. This is like a full, this is us for a full length of time sort of thing. So it's, yeah, it's all a bit, we don't know when any of us are ever going to be out in public again doing real improv to real people, but yeah, that's kind of our ideas.
Cool. Something that you mentioned before, which was kind of interesting, was the way that something that you hate is when you come on and being a woman, sometimes you are labelled as the assistant or like the wife and stuff. What has been your experience as a woman in the improv community? And I apologize if that's a question you get asked a lot.
No, it's fine. I think it's like, I'm constantly caught between not wanting to be seen as a woman improviser, because that kind of almost comes with its own sort of, people don't tend to say male improviser, they just say, you know, it's like women comedian. Like, it's frustrating, but it's also, it's undeniably been a different experience for me than it has, say, for Joe, because there are things that I have sort of dealt with or that have come across that just aren't the experiences of non-female improvisers. I think, at the risk of trying to sound like I'm really hard or anything, or like I'm trying to like, oh, I can take it, I tend to notice perhaps when things are attempted. So like when I feel like someone's trying to over me or steamroll me, but because I'm such a bobbing gal, I do fight against it. But I can see where it pushes people, and I can see where it then just reinforces this idea that like male improvisers just have a certain style and female improvisers have a certain style. They're from Venus, the one's from Mars. Like, and I do think it's incorrect. Like, I think that it's not that female improvisers or non-male improvisers can't get on the same level as the lads. Like, and I sometimes then cringe when the answer to all of these is like, oh, we'll have women only things. Because I think female only troops are great. Like, I think it's awesome. I think, you know, it's you see male only troops all the time. So absolutely, like, seeing female only troops. But if that's the answer to issues when a woman is on stage, like, that sucks, because that just feels like it's saying, yeah, we do seem to be making your life a misery. What if you had to go off and just do your own thing? And I think at a certain point you go, that's not actually fixing the problem. Like, not to mention that, like, you still see female troops, but you worry that, like, are they less likely to get booked now because, you know, like, female comedians, like, often, like, in stand-up, like, there's so often so many issues with, like, being nearly all male lineups and things like that. So I think broadly my experience has been very positive, and I surround myself with people that have these kind of conversations and are conscious of it and do think it's important, and don't pretend that actually there's no difference and they would never treat a female improviser differently and all this kind of stuff. but it is there and it is present, and it's not even just on stage. It's like how it can feel to be a woman going into a new place, like going into a gig. You don't always know how people are going to talk to you and like treat you. The suggestions from the audience even can be very different as a woman. Like if you ask for a suggestion, sometimes you're more likely to get something that's maybe a bit sexual or a bit rude or a bit demeaning. You don't always feel that perhaps like you're getting taken as seriously sometimes, or certainly if you are the only woman in like an all-male troupe, which like as was often my experience of doing improv, was it would be me and 5 other guys, you're always getting tapped out first, or you're always getting sweeped, or you've established something and someone else comes on and just says it louder and you're like, are we in a business meeting? Like, I'm not quite sure what this is. And I think a lot of it comes down to we need more women leading troupes. Like we need to see more women like running things. Like I think like in all areas, like there needs to be, rather than having everyone put their heads together and like worry about diversity, it's like there needs to be diversity from the top down, like until there's that actual like structural change in the way that improv is delivered. I don't want handouts. Like I don't want someone to benevolently give me the chance to perform. There should be this recognised like thing that women and like other minorities like are actually the ones running stuff. And I think that's what shifted for me. Was suddenly I was running my own company with Joe. And it took a while because a lot of people would just message Joe, or they talk about Joe and Joe running it. But once, like, I think I was able to kind of assert the fact that I was like, not only am I doing improv, this is my show. I'm actually running this, so you answer to me. That was like sort of a big shift, and I'd like to see more of it. To be honest, I think.
Okay, but now to the real business. Gallagher, what's it like to improvise as a man?
Well,
I love it.
You know, I'm glad that somebody finally asked that question, McInnes.
You're watching the only improv chat show where we're going to ask men about their opinions of comedy.
Oh God! Sadly, it would probably become the most popular thing as well.
Only amongst bad people.
Oh yeah, only amongst bad, but there's more bad than good these days, apparently. McInnes, have you got any? I feel like we've had a really nice conversation, Charlie. It's been wonderful. You've given us so much information. McInnes, as always, do you have a final question for Charlie?
I mean, I never plan anything. I think something.
That's why I asked.
Okay. What's a move you do in a scene that you do it too much and you know it's cheap, but you think it's fun to do?
Other than like when I sort of mentioned earlier about the over-establishing, a move that I know I do too much but I think is cheap is to just go for the knob gag. just go toilet humour. Like I try and avoid it, and it's like swearing. Like I try and avoid just going straight in with like a big bleep word like really early on. But when I'm panicking, I'll just be like, everything's poo now, poo poo poo, poo, and suddenly everyone's like, oh god, the poo's come back. So I think some say too much, others say don't ever do it. Joe begs me, but I think if his knee-jerk thing to do is to be an angry Italian man, because that seems to be his character, mine is definitely to just lower the tone, like, and just to flush the tone down the low.
Well, Charlie, if everybody else disagrees and disapproves of this, you know that the Billy Boys approve of you bring poo more into scenes, and we want more poo in scenes.
Can I get that on a t-shirt?
Yes.
I can just open it and be like, listen, I'm valid in humour. Thank you very much.
Great.
We do want poo. Stop laughing. We want poo.
It's true. Like that's one of the things that always cracks me up. Even as like a young kid, it just makes me laugh. Anybody says that in an improv scene, I just burst out laughing. That's the most hard, man.
It doesn't.
You asked me. You asked me if something was in my butt earlier.
Oh yeah, I did.
And then you were like, "Did you get it? Because your name is Bottom." And it was like, everyone needs to understand that this is a bum joke right now. And it's like, yeah, I totally get. It's never not funny, and I will die on this hill, this pooey hill. I will die on it.
Charlie, I did my research. I knew you'd love it. That's what I said.
I coincidentally.
Any toilet jokes on stage.
I mean, the second I named that guy Timothy Bottoms, I was like, this isn't really it now. That's the name of a famous actor. But also his last name is Bottom.
I love Timothy Bottom.
From Dublin.
Oh.
Never had a Dublin accent. Love it. Guys, I think we're going to call it there. That's so much stuff has been spoken about. Charlie, thank you so much for being on the show and for doing improv with us. It was an absolute joy for me.
It was awesome. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to... you've done your plugs before, but do it again. It's a different show.
So all our stuff's on Facebook, so if there's ever anything going down, we're posting it on the social medias. So I don't know why I said that was weird.
What's going down?
Down. If Joe was here. Oh god, I'm not normally used to being on my own anymore. Just literally sweating. So Little Chicago Comedy Productions on Facebook, and Long Boy and the Noise. It's boy with an I because we named it that and we can't back out now because we've had like merch made. And we're on like Twitter and Instagram and also TikTok, which I did forget to mention. Technically, Long Boy is TikTok because we are moving with the times and we're putting our terrible content into like 1 minute long videos. So yeah, go and search us out and see that.
Cool. McInnes, any plugs?
This show's usually Wednesdays. I think it is next Wednesday, right? Who have we got next Wednesday?
Next Wednesday we have Yanis from Comedian.
Yanis, yeah. That'll be fun. I do Late Night with the Garfiles. I think we're doing it this week at 2 a.m. every Friday, 2 a.m. Thursday night. I think we might change the time slot, but it's a late night style chat show where me and Philip talk about Garfield, also the X-Files, and the house musician changes every week. It's fun. Nothing else. Just go to my Twitter. That's where I contain everything. At Liebot. Liebot.
We will have more, like McInnes said, next week we will have another guest and do another BLC chats and another Billy Boy show.
Galcra plug stuff.
I'm doing it. I'm in the middle of it.
Okay.
If you'd like to hear more from me, you can. I do a show called Boat Club, which has a YouTube channel called Boat Club. Every Monday evening we do shows. It's just improv with 3 dudes. And for more content on Bristol Open Comedy, follow us on this page.
Galcra, plug something.
I'm doing it. I'm literally doing it.
Okay.
There's more content here on the Bristol Open Comedy page. We have a website, bristolopen.com, and there's nothing. I'm waiting for McInnes to say it again because it's a very clear rule of three.
You've made clear that you're already. You've made clear that you're already plugging. Why would I repeat it? I was confused momentarily, and then you clarified.
Maybe we should have another discussion about why McInnes doesn't want to patent.
Gallagher, plug it. Plug stuff.
That's the end of our show.
Yeah. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you, Charlie.
Bye.
Bye.
Sweet bride to the fame.